All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving headfirst into the Little Red Book.
Ooh, yeah. Venturing into the thoughts of Chairman Mao, one of the heavy hitters of the 20th century.
It's true. Quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. This book, it's like a direct line to understanding a whole generation, a whole revolution, really.
Absolutely. This wasn't just some dusty old book. It was like the guidebook. People lived and breathed these words.
Especially during the Cultural Revolution, talk about impact. Millions carrying this book, using it to navigate, well, everything.
Exactly. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind for a sec. For anyone who might be new to this whole thing.
Who was Mao Zedong, and why should we even care about his quotes?
Okay, so Mao Zedong, he was the big man in China, the paramount leader from the communist victory in 49 all the way to 76.
Yeah, a long time.
And his ideology, we call it Maoism, wasn't just about governing. It was about reshaping society, flipping the script completely.
And that's where the Little Red Book comes in handy, right?
Exactly. It's like taking all of Mao's big speeches, all his writings, and boiling them down in these potent little nuggets of revolutionary wisdom. And during the Cultural Revolution, well, let me tell you.
It was the thing to have.
Oh, more than just a thing. It was mandatory. People were expected to, not just read these quotes, but to embody them,
Yeah.
use them for every single part of life. It's wild.
Wild is probably a good word for it. So today, we're going to unpack all that. We're talking about the core principles of Mao's ideology, leadership, revolution, the party, the people, the whole shebang. We'll try to keep it, interesting, I promise.
And the thing is, these quotes, they're not just history. They give us a window into how things work then. And honestly, they still shape China's political scene, even now.
It's true.
Even if you think you know a bit about Mao, trust me, these quotes, they can still surprise you.
All right, let's dive into the good stuff, the core of Mao's thinking. This Little Red Book, it's got chapters, like a roadmap, and each one is a different theme, so we'll just follow along with that.
Makes sense.
First up, the big one. The party, the heart of it all.
The Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't talk about Maoism without understanding how central that was to everything. I mean, he wasn't messing around with, baby steps.
Yeah.
He wanted a complete system overhaul.
Total transformation.
Exactly. And for Mao, the party, it wasn't just a means to an end. It was the way to get there.
No other way. And he lays it out there pretty bluntly. Without the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party, China can never achieve independence and liberation or industrialization and the modernization of her agriculture. Straightforward.
No beating around the bush there.
So no wiggle room there. But what did that look like on the ground, in actual people's lives?
Okay, so imagine this. The party. It's calling the shots on everything. And I mean everything. Politics, sure, but also culture, education, even what people believed personally. Wow.
Quite intense. So how did he justify that level of control? Was it just about power, or was there an idea behind it?
Okay, so he was really into this idea of a vanguard party. It's Lenin, it's from him. The idea is that the party, it's not just some random group, okay? They're the ones who are the most class conscious, the most gung-ho about the revolution. They're the ones who can lead everyone else to that socialist promised land.
The chosen ones, basically. But what about the people who didn't fit into that vision? And that kind of leads us to another big one, class struggle.
Right, and this is where things get a little more interesting. See, Mao, he believed that history, it's all about the clash between different classes. It's like the engine driving everything.
And for China back then, that meant
peasants versus landlords, workers versus capitalists, the haves and have-nots, right?
Yeah, and he didn't shy away from it either. He said, classes struggle, some classes triumph, others are eliminated. It's pretty hardcore when you think about it.
Straight up.
Yeah.
But you got to remember what was happening back then. China was seriously messed up, tons of inequality. So Mao, he thought that to actually get to a place of real fairness, they had to, shake things up big time.
Even if it meant, serious conflict.
Even then. Because for him, this wasn't a quick fix. It was this protracted struggle, this long game, right? To reach that socialist utopia, that perfect society he envisioned.
A long game.
Yeah. And that's where you see Marx's influence, right? That whole idea of revolution is this ongoing thing.
Yeah.
But Mao, he took it even further because he believed that even when you get to socialism, it's not over. You always got to watch out for those capitalist tendencies creeping back in,
So it's not just about winning, it's about staying vigilant.
Totally. You got to watch out for enemies, inside and outside, anyone trying to mess with the revolution. And that brings us to another Mao classic.
Go for it.
Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
Not exactly subtle.
Not at all. But again, context, right. Mao, he didn't just waltz into power, he fought his way there.
Years of struggle against the nationalists, against the Japanese, against, like, everyone, basically.
So for him, this wasn't just talk, this was lived experience.
Exactly. He'd seen firsthand that real change, like shaking things up for good. It doesn't happen by just being nice.
Wow. But even with a revolution won, then what? Holding on to power, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the masses come in.
Okay, so here's the thing about Maoism, right? It might seem like it's all about the party having absolute control.
But at the same time, he put a lot of emphasis on the masses, the everyday people.
It's like he said, the masses are the real heroes, while we ourselves are often childish and ignorant. A little surprising to hear that from him, honestly.
Right, but that's the mass line. That was big for him.
Mass line. Okay, break that down for me.
It means that leaders, they got to be in touch with the people, like really in touch, understand what they need, listen to their experiences, and actually use that when they make decisions.
So it's not just top down, it's a two-way street.
Exactly. It's about bridging that gap between the party bigwigs and, everyone else.
Easier said than done, I imagine.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It was a tightrope walk, honestly. And how well they managed that, well, that changed over time.
Speaking of challenges, China back then, they had it rough. Poverty, underdevelopment, still recovering from being pushed around by foreign powers, right?
It's true. Yeah.
And that's where this idea of self-reliance comes in. Like, he practically said it straight up. We stand for self-reliance. We depend on our own efforts. And that's powerful stuff, especially for a country that's been through, some things.
No kidding. For China, after centuries of being pushed around by other countries, this idea of self-reliance, it was huge, like a breath of fresh air.
Totally. It was about reclaiming their strength, proving they could stand on their own 2 feet, economically, politically, you name it.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot, from the party's iron grip to class struggle to pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and going it alone. But these weren't just concepts for Mao, right? This was supposed to be real life.
Oh yeah, this wasn't just about theory. It was about putting those ideas into action,
Living it, not just reading it.
Exactly. And one of his big things was investigation and study. He always said, no investigation, no right to speak.
No armchair quarterbacking when it comes to revolution.
Nope. You got to get your hands dirty, figure out what's really going on before you go changing the world,
Makes sense. But what about when things go sideways? Because they always do, right? Did Mao ever, admit that things could go wrong?
Oh, yeah. And this is where you see, another side to him. Because he was big on this whole self-criticism thing, admitting that anyone could mess up, even the party.
Really? Even the big guys? That's kind of humble, actually.
Right. But for him, that self-criticism, it wasn't about placing blame or anything. It was about always trying to be better, to figure out what wasn't working and fix it.
It's like constantly adapting, which makes sense in a revolution, right?
Exactly. You got to be able to roll with the punches, change your game plan when things get tough.
Makes sense. But how do you square that with needing everyone to be united, to follow the party line? That's got to be tough to balance, right?
Totally. It was this delicate dance between individual reflection and, the needs of the collective. But for Mao, unity, it didn't mean blindly following the leader. It was about believing in the revolution, working together to reach that shared goal. And that's where that whole mass line thing comes back in.
Right. Bring it full circle. Listening to the people, even when they're telling you messed up.
Exactly. That open dialogue, that feedback loop, it was vital.
Makes you think about that story in the book, right? About the party leader who's offered better food, but he refuses because he wants to share the same hardships as his soldiers. It's a small thing, but
it speaks volumes.
Totally.
Yeah.
It shows that whole idea of being humble, serving the people, not lording over them. It's wild. We started with these huge ideas, revolution, changing the world, and now we're talking about humility. Human connection is kind of cool, actually.
Right. It reminds you that even these giant figures of history, they were still just people, figuring things out as they went. That's the beauty of diving into stuff like this, these quotes. You get a glimpse inside their heads, see how they wrestled with these big, messy questions. And honestly, those same questions, they're still relevant today,
Yeah, totally. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Little Red Book, I guess the question for all of you is, are these ideas still relevant today? Are they still shaping things? Or are they fading into history? Something to chew on.